Welcome to Chapter 3, Internal CSS, Part 2. Your essential outcomes. You will be able to manipulate the physical design of a web page by utilizing CSS internal styling, employing the universal selector, styling the box model for CSS, creating ID selectors for div tags and image tags, and you are responsible for learning the key terms in the chapter and connecting them to application. The box model. The box model implies that the browser needs to understand all elements as living inside of a container or a box. When aligning text, text is aligned relative to the element's entire box. In Chapter 2, you learn the difference between block elements and inline elements. In this chapter, you will begin to put them into practice. Boxes or containers are invisible, which is why you do not see them until you add a border. All elements are squares, though you can trick CSS in displaying them as circles. The box dimensions. There are two types of dimensions for the containers or the boxes, width and height. You need internal styling for each section on the page. To adjust default dimensions, you can use pixels, which sets the exact size of an element's box, EMs, which sets dimensions relative to the size of the text within a box. This is probably the best dimension to use. Percentages. This is where the unit sets dimensions relative to the size of the box in case it is encased in. Width and height for containers. In regards to width, you will use a min width, which ensures a minimum width for an element's box, a max width. This ensures a maximum width. Min height, this ensures a minimum height, and then you have max height. This ensures a maximum height. Before beginning your CSS styling, always make sure your browser is set at 100%. If you don't, you may have some distortion when you enlarge your web page back to the 100%. You will find the zoom on your settings for your browser in the top right corner. Look for the three little dots, and then just make sure the zoom is set at 100%. Width and height. All sections, as stated earlier, need a height and a width. These dimensions will help you control your objects. Note the widths and heights you choose depends on the look you want for your web page. If you look to the right for the example, we have the header set up with a min width, a max width, a min height, and a max height. Also, we have the nav bar set up with a min width, max width, min height, max height. These numbers will be based on placement or how you want to set up the styling on your page. Properties and values. We have identified our selectors as being HTML tags. There is a property and value that you need to be aware of called padding. This is the space between the contents of a box and the borders of a box. Padding creates space so that text is not placed up against the border. Padding is set similar to margins. You have your top, right, bottom, left, and you want to go clockwise. Or you can set up shortcuts similar to margins as well. In the example to the right, Notice that we have our a nav bar with padding dash right of 9 pixels. Floating is another property that you need to be aware of. The float property is used to wrap text around objects, in other words, to move them. The float property will float an image to the left of the text, whereas if you use the float right, it will move the object to the right of the text. In the example to the right, the nav section is being floated to the right side of the header section. In the example above, the nav section contains the unordered list has been floated to the right of the header. The borders are displaying the block element so that you can see the difference between the two block elements. The header block element has a blue border. The nav bar element has the white border. I have tricked CSS into aligning two block elements side by side by using the CSS styling float property value and using dimensions. Borders around objects. Borders place a line on the object so that the object may be clearly identified. I really highly suggest that you use borders so that you can see the borders, understand how they're maneuvering, and the size of those objects. You may remove the borders after you're done. All you have to do is change the pixel size to 0. When you set a border, the property is borders. The value would be the pixel size of the border, the type of border, and color. So if you look at the examples to the left, under the header, we have a border that is 4 pixels solid with a specific color. And under the nav bar, we have a border with pixels and that is solid with a specific color. Aligning objects. When we talk about aligning objects, we're talking about horizontal alignment. This will allow you to move an object or a text left, right, center, or justify. The default alignment for CSS is always left. A thing to remember is that the horizontal alignment does not work on pictures or buttons, only on text. To align a button or a picture, place the picture inside or a button inside a div tag, and then use the horizontal alignment within the div property to actually center or set your alignment. In the example below, in the header, you're going to see that we were able to center the text as well as the button by simply putting it in the header. A few other ID selectors that you will have to style. If you look, the heading 1 HTML tag will also need a heading selector. In this case, we have set up the heading 1 selector with a font size, a font family, and a color. Notice that in the font family, because there's spaces between Old English text MT, whenever there's spaces between that font family name, you'll need to have to put that in quotation marks. And we also have color. We also have set up ID selectors for the unordered list and the line item, list item tag. Notice that we put these two together, so we've grouped these two selectors because we want to apply the same type of formatting to both. So in this case, we are going to change the font size and the color for both the unordered list and the line item. You can also add a button selector. The first thing to do is to remove the styling from inside the button HTML tag that is located in your header, and then replace the styling with the button selector and add the appropriate properties with values. In this one, for my button, I added the property values font family, font size, and background color, so I added 3 declarations to the button ID selector. The header and nav selectors with their property and values. If you look at the first section, it is the header section. You will see the header selector, followed by the opening curly bracket, and then a listing of 7 declarations underneath the header. These are declarations contain the property values of the property with values. The next section that we look at is the nav selectors. Inside the nav selector, you have the opening curly bracket, followed by 7 declarations that show the property and the values that are being applied to the nav section. We also have our H1 selector that is applying property values to all H1 tags in the document. We have 3 declarations underneath the H1. And then we have the unordered list and the line selectors. Both of these selectors target the unordered list and the line items within the unordered list. And there are 2 declarations that are being applied to these 2 selectors. So, looking at the image on the page, on the slide, this is what our headers section looks like, as well as our nav bar. The header selection has the blue border. The nav has the white border. When we remove the border in the nav section, it will look as follows. Notice that I did not remove the border from the header. You can if you want. I was just trying to show you how you can remove the header or the border from the nav bar if you don't want the lines. You have just finished section 3-2. Now it's time for your activities. Go back to the chapter 3 first website page, open up the index.html document in Notepad++. Add the following property and styling to the header and navbar sections. You want the height and width, margins if necessary, padding if needed, borders with size, style, and color. You want to float the nav section alongside the header section. And you want to style the H1 tag and the UL and LI tags. Last, create your button selector. Congratulations, you have just finished section 3-2. Please show me your work and then move on to section 3-3.